Susan Jordan didn't walk into court that morning expecting to change history. She just wanted to be heard, to say her truth before people who had already decided she was guilty. But when Officer Powell raised his hand and slapped her across the face in front of everyone, something inside her snapped. The courtroom went silent. The judge's gavel froze midair, and within seconds, everything turned upside down. What happened next made every person in that room question what justice really meant. Stick around until the end, because you are going to see how the black woman really took the judge's seat and exactly what she did. Susan Jordan was tired. Not the kind of tired a nap could fix, but the kind that sat deep in her bones. For years, she had been trying to prove she wasn't the person people said she was. A fighter, yes. A troublemaker, maybe. But never a criminal. That morning, she stood in front of the courthouse, holding her purse close, her fingers trembling. Her lawyer hadn't shown up. Her mother was sick at home, and the judge, Judge Waltham, had a reputation. He didn't like attitude. He didn't like questions. And he definitely didn't like Susan. Officer Powell, the man who arrested her, stood near the door. Tall, pale, clean uniform, dark sunglasses, even though they were inside. His jaw was tight. His eyes were sharp and cold, like someone waiting for a reason to explode. Susan took a deep breath and stepped inside the courtroom. It was cold inside, not from air conditioning, but from the eyes staring at her. The people whispered. Some pointed. Others just watched, curious, waiting for something to happen. Susan walked to her seat and sat down, folding her hands together. "Case of the state versus Susan Jordan," the clerk said. Judge Waltham looked down from his tall chair. "Miss Jordan, you're accused of resisting arrest, disturbing the peace, and obstructing an officer in duty. How do you plead?" Susan swallowed hard. "Not guilty, Your Honor." Her voice was calm, but her heart was pounding like thunder. The judge nodded slowly. "We'll see about that." They played the video of her arrest, at least the part that was recorded. It showed Susan outside a grocery store, shouting at Officer Powell, but it didn't show what came before. How he shoved her first, how he twisted her arm when she asked why he stopped her, or how he whispered words he shouldn't have said. "Looks pretty clear to me," the judge said, glancing at Powell with a smirk. "Officer, what happened after this?" Powell stepped forward. "She fought me, Your Honor. She screamed, tried to grab my radio, said she'd make me pay." "That's a lie!" Susan shouted. "He pushed me first!" The judge banged his gavel. "Miss Jordan, you will remain silent unless spoken to." The courtroom buzzed. Reporters typed quickly. The smell of sweat and old paper filled the air. Susan bit her lip, tasting blood. She wanted to scream, but she knew it would only make things worse. The judge asked Powell more questions, and each answer made Susan look worse. Powell was calm, smooth, practiced. He smiled sometimes, as if this was just another show. When Susan was finally allowed to speak, she stood up. "Your Honor, I was scared. I wasn't fighting him. I was trying to protect myself." The judge sighed, rolling his eyes. "Miss Jordan, the evidence is clear. You were resisting." "No," Susan shouted. "You didn't see what he did to me." The judge leaned forward. "You are out of line, Miss Jordan." Powell took a step closer. "You'd better calm down," he said, his voice low. Susan looked him in the eye. "You hit me once. You won't do it again." The words slipped out before she could stop them. The judge frowned. "Officer Powell, remove her from the stand." As Powell reached for her arm, she jerked away. The sound of her chair scraping across the floor echoed through the room. People gasped. The judge shouted for order. "Don't touch me!" Susan cried. But Powell didn't stop. He grabbed her wrist hard, and she twisted, trying to break free. Then it happened. Slap! It echoed through the courtroom like thunder. Her head snapped to the side. Her cheek burned hot. The room froze.
Even the judge stopped breathing for a second. Susan's heart raced. She blinked, her eyes filling with tears, not from pain, but from something deeper, something powerful. Everyone stared. The silence was louder than any scream. The judge cleared his throat. "Officer Powell, that's enough." But the words came too late. Something inside Susan had shifted. Slowly, she stood straight. Her voice was quiet, but strong. "You all saw that." No one answered. "You all saw what he just did." Still silence. Powell stepped back, realizing what he'd done. She moved at me." Susan raised her hand. "Don't lie again. Not this time." Her voice had a strange calm now, like she wasn't afraid anymore. She looked around the courtroom, at the judge, the officers, the people, the reporters. Every eye was on her. "Do you see me? Really see me? Or do you just see what you expect?" The judge tried to speak, but Susan kept going. "All my life, people like you have told people like me to sit down, be quiet, and let others decide what's right. But look around. Who's really breaking the law here?" Her words cut through the air like lightning. One woman in the crowd started clapping. Just one. Then another joined. Then another. The sound grew louder, spreading like a wave. The judge pounded his gavel. "Order! Order in the court!" But no one stopped. Susan turned toward the bench. "If justice means truth, then let's tell it. Let's show it." And before anyone could stop her, she did something no one expected. She stepped up onto the small platform near the judge's bench. The bailiff shouted. Reporters stood. Cameras flashed. "Miss Jordan, step down!" But Susan didn't. She reached for the judge's robe and gently laid it across her shoulders. The courtroom gasped. Susan turned toward the crowd. She didn't sit right away. She stood there, holding the gavel in her hand, staring at the people who had judged her before hearing her truth. Then, slowly, she sat in the judge's chair. The same chair that once had looked down on her. The room was spinning. Not from fear, but from realization. "Miss Jordan, you're making a mockery of this court," Judge Waltham shouted. Susan looked him dead in the eye. "No, Your Honor. I'm showing you what it feels like to be on the other side." Powell stepped forward again, furious. "That's enough!" "Enough?" Susan's voice rose. "You hit me in front of everyone. You called it justice. So what is this? What's justice now?" No one had an answer, not even the judge. The room fell quiet again. You could hear every breath, every heartbeat. Susan sat there trembling, but strong. For the first time, she wasn't small. She wasn't begging to be heard. She was being heard. The robe hung loosely on her shoulders. It didn't fit her, not yet. But something about it felt right, like it was where she was meant to be. Reporters were still recording, people were whispering, but Susan didn't care. She had already done the impossible. The woman who was slapped now sat where power once lived. And though no one knew it yet, that moment, those few seconds, would change everything that came after.
For a few seconds, no one moved. Not the judge, not Officer Powell, not the people in the stands. Everyone was frozen, like time itself had stopped to watch what would happen next. Susan sat still, the heavy robe draped over her shoulders, her fingers wrapped around the gavel. The weight of it felt strange, solid, cold, but alive. It carried every judgment ever made in that room, every lie, every truth ignored. And now it was in her hands. The crack in the room. "Miss Jordan," Judge Waltham said again, his voice shaking with anger, "you are in contempt of court. Step away from my seat this instant." But Susan didn't move. Her voice came out steady.
I was in contempt of this court the day I was born black in this city. And still, I showed up. Gasps filled the air. The reporters were on their feet. Cameras blinked like lightning. Officer Powell moved closer. "I'm ending this," he said. He reached for Susan's arm again, but before he could touch her, Susan banged the gavel once. Bam! The sound echoed like thunder. Everyone jumped. "Sit down, Officer Powell," she said. Her tone, calm, certain, commanding, wasn't a plea. It was a verdict. Something in Powell's body froze. He didn't understand why, but for the first time, he hesitated. His hand trembled. The people in the crowd watched him, watched her, watched everything that was suddenly upside down. From the back, an older man stood up. His voice cracked, but was strong. "Let us speak," he said. Then another voice, and another. Soon the courtroom was filled with murmurs, not of shock, but of agreement. "Let us speak. Let her finish. She's right." The judge slammed his hand on the desk. "This is my courtroom." Susan turned to him. "Your courtroom or the people's?" He opened his mouth, but no words came out. He just stood there, red-faced, trembling, his robeless shoulders suddenly looking small. Susan took a deep breath. "You want to talk about justice? Let's talk about what happened before that video started." Her voice wavered, but she didn't stop. "I was stopped because I was driving home from work at night with my music on. He said I looked suspicious. I asked why. He didn't answer. He told me to get out of the car. I said no. I asked for a reason. And then," her voice broke for a moment. The whole courtroom leaned forward, listening. "He pulled me out by my arm. He threw me on the ground. I told him I couldn't breathe, and when I tried to stand, he said I was resisting." Officer Powell's face hardened. "That's not what happened." Susan pointed the gavel at him. "You had your body cam. Where's that footage, officer?" He blinked. It malfunctioned." "Malfunction," she repeated slowly, her eyes locking on his. "Like it always does when the truth gets ugly, right?" The room stirred. Reporters scribbled furiously. Even the judge didn't interrupt. Powell's confidence cracked. He looked at the judge for help, but the judge's face had gone pale. "Officer," Susan said, her tone turning sharp, "when you hit me just now, did your camera malfunction again?" No answer. "Answer the question." He hesitated. "It was instinct." "Instinct," Susan said, her voice rising. "To hit a woman in handcuffs? To silence someone when they speak the truth?" The gavel hit the wood again, hard. Bam! "This," she said, "is the sound of the truth you tried to bury." The judge suddenly shouted, "Bailiff, remove her!" But the bailiff didn't move. He looked confused, torn. The crowd's energy was shifting fast. People were standing, whispering, recording. "Bailiff!" the judge barked again. The bailiff looked at Susan, then at the judge, then back. "Sir, maybe we should just hear her out." The judge's jaw dropped. "You're disobeying me?" "No, sir," the bailiff said quietly. "I'm just doing what's right." Susan turned to him and gave him a small nod. Something silent passed between them, something human. Susan stood up, the robe still hanging loosely from her shoulders. "All my life, people told me I needed to be quiet to survive, that if I just behaved, I'd be safe. But safety doesn't come from silence. It comes from truth." Her words were soft, but they hit like thunder. Every time someone like me walks into a courtroom, we already know how it's going to end. You look at us and see danger, anger, trouble, anything but human. The judge tried to speak again, but she raised her hand. "No more interruptions," she said firmly. "You've had your turn for years." The crowd was silent. You could feel every breath, every heartbeat, every emotion in that room. Susan looked around and said quietly, "I'm not the only one." How many people were silenced in this courtroom before me? How many were judged before they even spoke? An old woman near the front began to cry. A young man whispered, "Too many." By now, news had spread. Outside the courthouse, people were gathering, hundreds of them. They held signs, phones pointed toward the windows. The chant was clear and growing. "Let her speak! Let her speak!" From where she sat, she could hear them. Her heart swelled. The judge finally yelled, "This trial is over." Susan turned to him one last time. "No, Your Honor, this trial just began." She lifted the gavel high, not as a weapon, but as a symbol. Then she placed the gavel down gently. The judge stormed out of the room. Powell followed, his face dark with shame and confusion. The bailiff stood still, unsure of what to do next. Susan sat there for a few moments longer, her chest rising and falling with deep breaths. A reporter called out, "Miss Jordan, what are you going to do now?" Susan looked up, her eyes calm. "I'm not the judge, but today I showed what happens when the wrong people hold the right power." The crowd erupted in applause. She stood up, took off the robe, and folded it neatly on the bench. Then she turned to the people. "This seat doesn't belong to him," she said softly. "It belongs to truth, and truth doesn't need permission to speak." Outside the courthouse, cameras flashed as Susan stepped through the doors. The crowd cheered. Some people cried. Others reached out just to touch her hand. A reporter shouted, "Do you realize what you just did?" Susan smiled faintly. "I didn't plan it. It just happened. Sometimes the truth doesn't knock. It kicks the door open." Her words spread everywhere. By that evening, her face was on every TV channel. Some called her brave, others called her crazy, but no one could ignore her. The video of the slap and her taking the judge's seat went viral. Millions watched it, millions felt it, and something strange began to happen. Other people started speaking up. A young mother in Chicago, a teacher in Atlanta, a man in New York who'd been wrongly accused. Susan's moment had cracked something open, a wall that had stood for generations. Weeks later, Susan was called back to the courthouse, but this time it wasn't for trial. It was for something else. The judge had resigned. Powell was under investigation, and the city had a new temporary judge, one who had requested Susan's presence. When she walked in, the crowd stood. Cameras flashed again, but this time there was peace in the air. The new judge smiled at her. "Susan," he said, "we can't erase what happened, but we can start something new." He pointed to the same seat she had taken weeks before. "Would you like to sit?" Susan hesitated, then walked forward. Slowly, she sat in the judge's seat again. This time, not out of rebellion, but out of respect. And for the first time, it felt right. Susan looked up at the crowd. Her voice was gentle. "Power doesn't come from where you sit. It comes from what you stand for." The crowd was silent, not with fear, but with awe. She lifted the gavel, feeling its weight again. This time, it didn't feel cold. It felt warm, alive, like it finally belonged in the hands of someone who understood its purpose. Bam! Court is now in session. And that was the moment. Everyone knew. The woman who was slapped in court didn't just take the judge's seat. She took back justice itself. If you enjoyed this story, like, share, comment, and subscribe. Thanks for watching.